Today I'll show you 6 stencil hacks to create unique designs to add texture and dimension to your projects. Today I'm using my stash of stencils to participate in Craft Your Stash, hosted by Lisa at Our Gray House and Tammy with the Rusted Willow. For the first project, we'll be using one of these chalk couture stencils. And this sign, I believe, is from Dollar General, and I'm going to place this stencil down on the front and make sure that it's adhered all the way around. I'm not removing that clip because it turns, so it is able to move out of the way just a little bit, just enough. So I'm using white chalk paint, and I'm just using an old key to a hotel door or something and just scraping that on to the stencil. And when you pull it back, look how beautiful that is. Very, very simple. Chalk Couture, you can find their stencils on sale at times, so be sure and check them out. Second stencil I'm using is actually from Tuesday morning when they were open, and I'm going to place it onto some watercolor paper, and I'm going to tape it in place, and I'm going to try a different type of technique here. First, I'm going to use Sandstone by Waverly, and I'm just going to use my stencil brush from Dollar Tree, and I'm just going to pounce it up and down all over the entire stencil. It won't be completely covered, but that's okay. And with this particular color, I did actually stencil outside of the stencil as well. I'm going to let that dry, and then I'm going to clean off the stencil and place it back down, but just a little bit offset, and I'm going to use a different color. This time I'm using Waverly chalk paint in ink. And I'm doing the same thing, covering the entire stencil, but this time I am not going outside of the stencil. Once again, I'll remove the stencil, clean it, and I'm going to place it back down again for the third time. Again, just a little bit offset. Now I'm using Waverly chalk paint in white. And here's how it's looking with all 3 colors. Now I'm going to use my heat gun to dry it, and then I'm going to add one more little embellishment. I took a little piece of tissue paper and I cut it into this shape here that looks kind of like a banner or a tag of some sort. And I'm using this clear stamp. I'm inking it up with black ink, and I'm going to stamp that tissue paper. Now I'm going to use a glue stick, and I'm going to glue it to the paper. Do not use a glue stick on the back of the tissue paper. It will tear, trust me, I know. So I had to do this twice. The purple glue stick does dry clear, so I'm not worried about that. But what I wish I would have done was taken an ink pad and gone around the edge of the tissue paper so that it would have stood out a little bit more. Now I'm going to add it into this Dollar Tree frame, and I think this is a lovely addition and a very good reminder. This is a stencil from Dollar Tree, and of course it's the alphabet, but I'm also going to be using a piece of tissue paper and a black crayon. Now this is a crayon rubbing. You're just going to rub over the top of the stencil, and I did discover after doing this about 3 times, it's best to go in one direction. Most of the time you do have to press down pretty good, and it's okay if you get out of the lines there. It's just going to kind of add to the project. So once I have that done, I'm going to go back with some colored pencils, and I'm just going to color in all the spaces. Now I start by coloring in the middle of the letters, but then I end up just kind of sporadically coloring in different places until it's completely colored in except for the letters.
Like every wave will find its way back into the big blue. I will find my way to you, and like a wave will find its way back into the big blue. I will find my way to you, and like a
And once it's completely colored in, I'm going to take one of these square frames from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to use the backing, the actual picture. I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to cut that tissue paper to fit over that picture. I'm going to adhere it to the mat because it doesn't quite fit. And this is going to go back into the frame and a perfect fit. This is another stencil from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to be using a canvas board from Dollar Tree and some modeling paste from Hobby Lobby. This modeling paste is kind of a frosting consistency, so it's really easy to spread, and I'm just spreading it on in a nice even layer over the stencil. Next, I'm just going to pull up that stencil, and look how beautiful that is. Now, I did use a heat gun to dry mine just a little bit before I went on with the next leaf. The last leaf was a little bit trickier because I really didn't want that stencil right on top of those leaves. So I dried it a little bit more with my heat gun, and that seemed to help. It dried pretty quickly. Now, once everything is completely dry, I'm going to be using Bayberry by Fusion, and I'm going to paint the entire piece. I started by painting the leaves or the plant area so I could be sure and get in all the little nooks and crannies, and then I painted the rest of the canvas. Now that the Bayberry paint has dried, I'm using Conservatory, also by Fusion, but I'm using a chip brush, and I'm just dry brushing lightly on top of all the leaves to highlight that texture. Now here's the way it looks right now, but I'm going to go a little bit further, and I'm going to be using some gold rub and buff, and I'm going to be dry brushing over the entire piece, starting with the leaves and then also over the canvas, and it does highlight some of those textured parts of the canvas as well. You could certainly frame this, but I chose to just display it on a little plate stand that belonged to my mother. It's a beautiful little brass piece, and I think it goes nicely with the gold rub and buff. Here's a little bit of graffiti art. I'm using this stencil, probably from Dollar Tree, but I'm really not sure. And I am tracing out the word create, and my intention was to use a white chalk marker from Dollar Tree, but my chalk marker didn't really cooperate, so it really just made the paper wet. But it's okay, it turns out pretty cool anyway. Much like I did in the other project, I am going to offset these letters just a little bit, and I'm going to be using some Crafter Square oil pastels. I'm using a separate color for each letter, and the paper that I'm using this on is actually from a bound book of New York Times newspapers. So I just tore one of those out, and I'm just using this middle section of the page. I'm using a wet paintbrush, just wet with water, and I'm just making kind of a squiggly line all the way across because I want to tear this piece of paper across instead of cutting it out. So I will do this all the way around the piece so that I get kind of a jagged edge. And here's how it looks so far. Now we're going to add a little bit to it by using some stamp pads. These are some stamp pads that I got from a thrift store, and they still are inked up a little bit, enough to use for this project. And I'm just dabbing them all over the paper. I then go back with a pencil and I kind of outline the letters so that they'll stand out just a little bit more. So now we're going to take this little piece and we're going to frame it. I did end up having to cut it down just a little bit. Well, I tore the edges down just a little bit to make it fit into this frame from Dollar Tree. I'm simply using the backing and flipping it over, using a glue stick to adhere it to the backing. The backing just happened to be just the right color for a match for this project. I'm going to slide it back into the frame, and then this project will be ready to be displayed. For this last project, I did end up using my Cricut Joy to make a stencil. So I cut out the words beautiful, and then I weeded out the actual letters, and then the negative part I put onto the glass of this Dollar Tree mirror. They do make stencil vinyl. I would recommend using that because this was really hard to pull off of that glass. But nevertheless, it worked fine. I'm going to be taping around the words so that I don't get any of my etching, my armor etch onto the mirror except where I want it. So this is armor etch. I got it from Hobby Lobby. I've had it for years. And you're just going to coat the top of these letters pretty thick, and you're supposed to leave it on for just 1 minute and then wash it off. You're also supposed to use gloves. I'm not doing that because I knew I wouldn't actually be touching it until I'm washing it, and then I'll worry about that then. So I'm putting it on there, a pretty generous coat, and letting it sit for 1 minute. After 1 minute, I took a baby wipe and I wiped back that armor etch and threw that immediately away so I didn't touch anything. Then I pulled off the stencils and the tape. What is left behind is actually etched onto the glass, and it looks very lovely. Now this next part, I had read that maybe you could use gold rub and buff to rub over those letters, and the rub and buff would actually stick to the etched part, but not the glass. That was not the case. That was not it at all. So the rub and buff stuck to everything, and I ended up going back and scraping it and scraping it. I finally got it off. So don't do that, but it did turn out very beautiful, I think. Y'all, don't forget to check out Lisa and Tammy's channels in the description box and the playlist. You're going to find a lot of great ideas on crafting your stash. I'm going to leave another video right here that I think you might like. Thanks so much for watching. Remember to share the chic. Bye now.